All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Nancy Leipzig. I am our Rotary District 6220 Learning Facilitator. This is our first Thursday educational opportunity, and so glad that you are all here. And I'm going to turn it over to our District Governor-elect, Roger Utnamer.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for coordinating these first Thursday events throughout the year. Very informative. One of Rotary's 7 areas of focus, one of Rotary International's major priorities is fostering peace and conflict resolution. As I approach the start of my year of district leadership, I can think of nothing more important to foster peace and conflict resolution than doing so with our Native American neighbors. Every Rotary Club in the United States meets on land that was formerly owned by First Nation peoples. Every Rotary Club in District 6220 is not far from a Native American reservation. Our nation's history of treatment of Native Americans is replete with missed opportunity. Rotary clubs throughout the country have missed opportunities to build goodwill and better friendship with Native peoples from whom much has been stolen. As district governor, I hope to be a part of changing that. Tonight, we start with an initiative of District 6220 to promote peace and conflict resolution by listening with respect and learning from our Indigenous neighbors. We have an opportunity to build goodwill and better friendship with First Nation people. Now I would like to welcome our speaker, Biskakane. He is a member of the Lac du Flambeau tribe of Lake Superior Indians in Ojibwe from Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. His colonial name is Greg Johnson. Greg is a journalist, artist, storyteller, and teacher of Native American language and culture. May we respond to his comments with respect. Our format will be informal and conversational, with time at the end for questions. So let me start by asking Biskakane if there's anything else that he would like you to know about him that I've not already mentioned. Biskakane, thank you and welcome.
Bonjour, and anyway, Magna Biskakane, Indigenous Bijou, Dode, Maswagan, Shkanaganing, and Unjaba, Odapanamawad, Wa Mishnabe, Otagazuan, Menua Jaganashimoin. My English name is Greg Johnson, and I come from the Lac du Flambeau Reservation, which is in the northern part of Wisconsin. It was formed, the reservation was formed in the Treaty of 1842. And we have a tribe of about 4,000 people here, between 3,800 and 4,000 people, somewhere in their last count. And we have a 12 by 12 reservation. And a lot of it was allotted land at one time. So we have a big responsibility on saving the little bit that we have left. And so there's a lot of issues up here with land, natural resources, fishing, and a lot of other things happen on our territory here. And so we're always fighting for the little bit that we have left. And so I come from a large family. I'm the youngest of 17. And behind me is a photo of my mother. She was a really great cook and a really wonderful person. And then over here, maybe I can show you later, is a picture of my grandmother and my grandfather. And they both have they're both gone now, but they both had a lot of respect in our tribe here. My grandfather was named, they had the fish hatchery in Lac du Flambeau here. They named it after him, William Poupart. And he was kind of like a conservationist, and He understood that there was a need for walleye to be shared with natives and non-natives, so he really put forth an effort to make sure that there was fish available for not only the native and non-native, but for future generations. And my grandmother, she was a wonderful, wonderful lady, very strong. She was really short, but she was a ball of fire. She did a lot of hunting and trapping and ricing and all these things, you know. And growing up, I got to see a little bit of that and experience that. And so I get a little bit of that from them too, and my mother and my father. And you know, I lived a really good, healthy, traditional life growing up, a lot free from alcohol and drugs. And so, and then later on, when I was about 16, I started learning a little bit more about my own culture, learning the language, spending time with credible elders and incredible ceremonial people. And so that's kind of where I learned what I know today. And I'm also I was the editor for a travel newspaper, and journalist and graphic artist for a number of years. And I did I'm a teacher now. I teach at the Lac du Flambeau grade school and the Lakeland high school as a language teacher and cultural teacher there. And so we respond language, and we make it possible to live that Ojibwe life for our children at the grade school and the high school. And you can hear my kids in here; they're eating supper right now. So.
Could you tell us a little more about what you are doing besides teaching to preserve your culture in Lac du Flambeau?
Oh yeah, so there's been a resurgence of ceremonial life as well. As I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but in 1978, it was legal for Native Americans again to practice their own religion. Prior to that, it was outlawed, and that was in my lifetime. And so since then, because of assimilation, the assimilation attempts, and the theft of our culture and our old ways, we're trying to rekindle that old ceremonial life. So here on our reservation, we have a lot of push to make sure that we still do that. And so I'm involved with that ceremonial revitalization. I'm involved with the language revitalization. And I also do a lot of beadwork and quill work and, you know, things with natural materials like tan hides. I build birch bark canoes, birch bark baskets. I work with black ash. I do a lot of things that you see in museums as well. So I get hired to do private pieces for different collections. And, you know, I teach weekly classes here on the reservation. We make moccasins, we make all the things that our ancestors did, you know. So that's a little bit of what else I do.
What might we find?
Hunter and fisherman too. So.
What would people find if they visited your art gallery in Lac du Flambeau?
Well, right now we have it's in the middle of winter, but it's really bustling in the summertime. We have t-shirts that we sell with like native Northwoods kind of themes on them. Shirts about living on the reservation, supporting native art, and the various seasonal things that happen up here. And this winter, we're going to fill our gallery up with baskets and moccasins, and you know, we have a few artists that we're going to put some of their work out as well.
Piscataquen, would you describe what it is like to be a Native American in northern Wisconsin today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Sometimes when we go and we harvest our wild rice, we have people that they'll shout things at you and say things to you. Or when we go spearfishing or whatever, we want to provide the best, healthiest food for our families, and we still practice a lot of our old culture, which is spearfishing and hunting and ricing and gathering and living off the land, even pulling bark off a tree. You know? And then there's always opposition. So Ojibwe people are constantly under a microscope. Everybody wants to know what we're doing all the time. So not only when we go out and we spearfish, do we get scrutinized by the state authorities, but we also have our own tribal wardens and our own tribal entities. They measure and sex each fish that we get out of the lake and make sure that we fall within a certain size limit. That way there's fish for the future. And that's our own governing. But beyond that, there's always somebody there watching us and making sure that we're in between the lines, you know. And you know, and in any race, there's good people and bad people. So there's people definitely from our tribe that they take it beyond what we're actually supposed to be doing. But then a majority, I'd say 95% of the people they just want to get their food, you know. And so we have to deal a lot with being under that microscope from the United States government and state government, and as well as our own local governments here. And when I was young, I went to high school during the spearfishing controversy, and I remember being it was even before I was in high school. I remember going into a local store here. They used to call it Red Owl a long time ago, and I went in there with my little grandmother. We made a pickup truck ride by, and that was the beginning of the spearfishing controversy. And my grandmother was walking next to me, and we had a truck roll by, and these two adult males were screaming at us, calling us timber, N-word, and they spit on us and they threw stuff at us. And, you know, that's what it was like growing up around here. And it's not as bad. And again, it got quiet for a while after a majority of the lawsuits against STA, Stop Treaty Abuse. There was an anti-Indian movement up here, and so they went to court and they lost in their own federal courts, and the judges sided with the tribes. And then after that, things got quiet. But recently, there's been a lot more anti-Indian movements, and a lot of it's online now. It's not really physical altercations like it used to be when I was younger, but now we're running into it online and in different forums, and people saying things online. Mostly that's where it's at now. So it's still there, but it's not so much in your face like it used to be.
Back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, the spearfishing controversy put northern Wisconsin in national news. Could you explain the treaty and what your people gave up in that treaty from the 1800s and what you received in return?
Right. So when the Ojibwe people settled this land in the 15, 16, 1700s, this was our land. You know, we came in here and we lived on it for hundreds of years, and we did all these things to survive. And so along comes the colonizers. They came along, and then they wanted the natural resources. They wanted the fish. They wanted the timber. They wanted the stuff under the ground. And so a series of treaties were negotiated with the United States government. And in those treaties, our people agreed to share the land with people, but we want to retain our hunting and fishing rights and our gathering rights. And so that lasted for just a few short years after the reservations were established. And once they piled everybody on the reservations, they kind of forgot about the treaties. And what happened was they broke that treaty. And anybody that was caught hunting or fishing or gathering off the reservation, they were cited. A lot of their equipment was confiscated, and a lot of they were thrown in jail, and sometimes they were beaten by the authorities at the time. And so that happened for many, many years. And it wasn't until the 80s, when treaty rights were reaffirmed, then we could hunt and gather as the United States promised that we could do it. But until that happened, anytime somebody went off the reservation, it was considered poaching. And it actually wasn't poaching. It was actually, these people were treated like criminals for wanting to continue to live that traditional life and eat those foods. And there was a lot of families that didn't want to eat the food that came in on the trains. A lot of that stuff was the beef, and it was no good by the time it reached the reservation. And some of it was the flour and gluten, things like that doesn't really agree with our bodies. And there was sugar and lard and dairy and all these things that doesn't jive with the our physical systems. And so a lot of people wanted to retain those old food habits, but you know, again, it was the treaty was broken, and our people got in a lot of trouble for trying to eat and survive, you know. And so we wanted to retain our rights, so we ceded land. And so when we ceded the land, we basically allowed timber companies and different companies to come in here and alter our land. And in return, we were supposed to have these rights, and we were supposed to have the government give us medical help and do all these various things for us, but they kind of did away with all that. And so the ceded territory goes from about Highway 29 in central Wisconsin all the way up to Lake Superior, and it goes over into Michigan, all the way down to just north of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it kind of cuts up at an angle, and then it goes all the way into Minnesota. And so that was the original land that all of our chiefs collectively ceded in these agreements with the United States government. And so, to answer your question, the land that we didn't transfer ownership, but we agreed to share the land, 50% of the resources, with the non-native people and the non-native governments, and thus we could stay here. But there was also a movement by certain past presidents where they tried to get the tribes from Wisconsin to move west of the Mississippi, and so there was removal attempts that happened here. So if you look at reservations in Wisconsin, they're very, very tiny. And if you look, and I challenge people to do this, look at a map, look at maps in Wisconsin and look at maps in Minnesota, and you can see the difference in size. Wisconsin reservations are tiny, and Minnesota reservations are massive, because at one time they were attempting to move us over into the Minnesota side of on the west side of the Mississippi River. And so our tribe probably would have been over where White Earth is, would have been consolidated groups of Ojibways, and they would have completely taken our land. But our chiefs at the time, they didn't like that. So what they did was they walked all the way to Washington, D.C. and got an audience with the president of the United States. And they convinced him that the United States and the Ojibwe nations in Wisconsin never took arms against the United States. And so that's how they persuaded the president to allow the Ojibwe people to stay in the state of Wisconsin. And so, I mean, there's a whole history there, and I urge people to look at that history.
Your former tribal chair, Tom Molson, during the spearfishing protests of the 80s and 90s, was spat upon. He was the victim of vulgar, crude racial epithets, yet he stood with self-respect and restraint. You've been shot at, and yet I find an almost spiritual ability to forgive and still welcome an opportunity to dialogue with people that represent a background that has not been your friend. Can you share where the Native American spirituality and ability to forgive is rooted, where it comes from?
Absolutely. So when I went out a few years ago, and I'm sure a lot of you probably heard about this or read about it in the news, there was a boat that went to harvest fish out on Little St. Germain Lake. And that was my crew, and it was myself, another teacher from another reservation. I don't think she's tribal member, but she was also from another reservation. And but she came along, she wanted to learn a little bit more. And then there was an elder, or one of our spiritual elders, and there was also a combat veteran in the boat with me. And we all went out, you know, and it was a harvesting mission, and it was also a learning opportunity for another teacher. So we get out in this boat and we go out into the middle of the bay from the landing. And my friend, who's a combat veteran, he said, "Which way do you want to go?" I said, "Well, don't go right, because last year we got threatened over there." I said, let's go left this time. He said, okay. So he turns the boat left and we start picking up fish right away, spearing the walleyes. And then we heard gunshots and we heard the projectiles coming over the top of us. So we were I told my friend to go out in the middle of the boat. So we went out or in the middle of the lake. So he went into the middle of the lake, and then we called the authorities, and they had apprehended him. And I understand from the police report later on that he was inebriated. You know, he wasn't in his right mind. And so what happened was that really wasn't him. That was something else happening. And we understand that not everybody has those feelings towards Native people. So we can't be angry and upset at the world. That's not going to do any good. But what we need to do is we need to look at ourselves and our lives, and we also need to make sure that we have a. Hold on one second. I'm on the phone here. Sorry about that. We have one of my friends just showed up, and so yeah. So what we do is we try to take care of ourselves and our mind, and understand that, you know, not everybody's like that. It's just a few people like that, and a lot of times they like to say things, and it's all here, you know, it's all right there. We understand that, and those are some of the teachings that we get as Native people. You know, we're not out looking for trouble. We're not trying to start anything. We just want to feed our families, and we just want to make sure that we have a. Yeah,
You can bring him onto the camera and say hello.
Yeah. This is my son, Siganok.
Hello there.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it is, you know, and then we think about our children, and we think about our loved ones and how they're affected by that. And we can't be bitter. We can't carry that on, you know. And so that's kind of where that all comes from.
Greg, when you think about misconceptions that non-Native people have about your culture, what would you like to address specifically to clarify misconceptions held by non-Native people?
Yeah, so one of the most common things that I read online is people assume that we get free money and that we get these checks, you know, and that doesn't happen, you know. And I always remind people, you know, like, I wish I got checks, you know, I wish I got free money, and we do get a little bit of money at the end of the year, but it's only a couple $100, you know. It's not like it's thousands of dollars or anything life altering. It's enough to fill up maybe a couple tanks of gas, you know. And so there's all these misconceptions on our revenues that we get from the casino, and a lot of the revenues that we get from the casino are there to help infrastructure of the tribe. They help with payroll for different programs and our health programs. And, you know, we have we're one of the largest employers in the county of Vilas County, and so we have a lot of bills to pay, you know. And so that's one of the misconceptions. The other ones that I know too are that we're out there selling our fish, and we're out there selling everything that we harvest from the land. You know, not that it's anybody's business, but a majority of our people do not do that. You know, we don't sell it. We eat that stuff. We bring it home. We provide it for our families. And then there's a lot of single mothers, elders, and lonely people on the reservation that we take care of with the food that we pull from the land, you know. And so when people from the outside see us going out and getting these quantities of fish, you know, their gears are turning and they're thinking something else, but that's not the case at all.
Is the casino more a positive than a negative? Are there any downsides as well as the economic benefits that it brings to your community?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few of the things that I notice about the casino that have negative impacts to our people are our own people get pulled into the gaming side of it, you know, and then it kind of screws up their way of life and their income, you know. And I know it's allowing people that we've never really had around here. They come here, And sometimes, once in a while, it'll be some riffraff, or sometimes we have some of these crazy motorcycle people coming down. I'm not saying all of them are crazy, but some of them are. Come up here and they start trouble, and then there's also some entitled people that come to the reservation. They think that because we have a casino, the whole reservation is a casino, so they can do whatever they want, and that's not the case at all.
Could you tell us a little bit about the history of the boarding houses and also the story of your aunt who was shipped to southern Michigan at 6 years of age and left and made it back by herself at 6 to Lac du Flambeau?
Right on. Yeah, so boarding school was one of the attempts at removing the culture from the Ojibwe people. And there was this one quote, and I don't quite remember it exactly, but it was kill the savage and save the soul, or something like that. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to erase our identity. And so one of the ways they did it was they used that Bible, and they used the boarding school to force our people in there. And what they did was they made sure they erased that language, or they attempted to erase that language from our elders. And so my grandmother and my grandmother's sister, my aunt, they both were taken from their house by force from an agent, and they were put on a train, and they left to go to a boarding school down in Lower Michigan. And when they both got there, my grandmother stayed there, but my aunt, who was a few years younger than my grandmother when she went in there, she left. She ran away, and we really don't know to this day how she made it all the way back. But she made it all the way back to Lac du Flambeau. And I mentioned this last night, that when she came here, the old people hid her out, and the agents were always on the lookout for her, and so they never found her. And the old people hid her out, and from that day, she was always afraid. She was afraid of authority figures. She was afraid of the police officer. She was afraid of anybody that had any kind of a badge on, and she was afraid of people in those churches. And so she didn't want anything to do with them. So she was always really secluded her whole life, and she never learned how to read or write. So, and I mentioned this yesterday, we'd go to the store with her growing up. And again, at that time, there was a lot of elders that way. They didn't know how to read or write. And so everybody always looks at it as a really, really bad thing. But you know what? There's a reason why the Native people chose not to live that way. And it was because it was forced on them, and it was beaten into them. And it was beaten into them by people that were supposedly we were supposed to look up to in our communities. And these are the people that did these atrocities on our grandparents. And so it wasn't just here that happened. That happened all over Canada, and it happened all over the United States and many, many different places. They did that to our people. So it's very, very sad. It's a very heartbreaking part of American history. What is American history? And we encourage people to understand that, accept it. Maybe up the road, that's something that we can avoid again. If history tends to repeat itself again, we don't want to do that to anybody else. We don't want to take away from them, because one thing we have to remember, that everybody that's not a Native American, they're immigrants. They all are. So we can't look down our nose at the people that are trying to make a life here, that come from the southern border or the northern border or another country, because everybody's an immigrant. Everybody's an immigrant. And so we need to say that. We need to address that.
In your 47 years, have you seen relations between natives and non-natives get better?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot better. There's still a lot of misconceptions. Another one is when we talk about how people portray us. And so today we can say that I don't like mascots, but our ancestors couldn't say that because they were in an area where that stuff was beat out of them through boarding schools. And so they didn't have that voice. They didn't have that like we have today. Today we can say, I don't like mascots. I don't like the Redskins. I don't like what's that other name? There's another name down in the Braves, all this stuff. And we understand today that that's like making fun of us. We don't like that, you know. A lot of Native people don't like that. There's some people that are like, whatever, you know. But that's just one example. Yeah, so there's a lot of things we could touch on that, you know, and that we could talk about that for days, you know.
Where do you find your optimism?
Well, I know a lot of people, and I have a lot. I come from a large family, and a lot of my non-native friends they're from all walks of life. I have friends that are from Korea. I have friends that are from Germany. I have friends that are Czechoslovakian. I have friends that are from France, and I talk with them a lot, you know. I have friends that are Canadians and tribes all over the world, even in New Zealand. And I get to hear from their sides, you know. I open my ears and I listen to them. And I want to understand that. Because we're all tribal. Everybody's a tribal person. You're a tribal person. You come from a tribe. And before this thing came and changed everybody's thought process, everybody came from a tribe. Everybody originated from a tribe. Everybody originated from clans. Everybody in the world did. And so we all have one common thing. Some of us are closer to it than others, you know. And so we understand what it's like to be without. We're closer to that. And we understand what it's like to also share what we currently have with our neighbors and our friends. And that's a part of being a cultural person, is understanding that and having that gift to share with everybody.
What suggestions do you have for those of us who are active in Rotary to build goodwill and better friendship with our Native American neighbors?
You know, when I was listening to the meeting you guys had last night, I was really intrigued by the idea, and I believe a few of you talked about it, was, you know, instead of reaching out across the world, and, you know, that's a beautiful thing to do, reach in our reservations and make those connections to those children that are on the reservation. Because I'm going to tell you something. When I was young, I didn't even know I was Native. I had no idea. Somebody came into our 7th grade class. I just assumed everybody was brown, and, you know, we all lived that way, and, you know, we all fished and hunted the way we did. I just assumed everybody in the world did that, you know. I had a very small world view. And it wasn't until I was in 7th grade, we had an elder from a different community came in and he told us that we were Ojibways, and I was like, we're natives? I thought everybody was Native. I had no idea, you know. And so our world was really small. And I think giving those younger people an opportunity to see the world and be a part of something bigger, you know. And I've always had appreciation for that kind of thing, you know, those exchange programs. And I think that would be a great thing. And it wasn't until I met some people from Brazil that were here when I was in high school. And I remember they came up and they were really looking up at the trees. And I remember this one lady, she was really like, every time she'd go outside, she'd look at the trees, you know. Finally, I said, what are you looking at? She said, I can't believe how big these trees are here. These pine trees are just enormous. And it kind of makes me feel really small, she said, you know. And so that's a different tribe. The people from Brazil, they were a different tribe. And so when they come up here and they saw it, and I got to see that interaction, you know, and I got to understand that. And I was like, wait a minute, this is another tribe from another side of the hemisphere, you know? And so I think giving people those opportunities, especially people of color, you know, giving them those opportunities to interact with other people. Because she came here and she lived with a non-native family in Minocqua. But we noticed, hey, there's another brown person here. Let's bring her over to the res. And we brought her here. We gave her a whole tribal experience. And today, to this day, we're still very, very close and very good friends, you know. And I think that
For
would
those of you who are on the call, Biscacane was a guest at the Wausau After Hours Rotary Club last night. And we had a discussion about opportunities for Rotary clubs to reach out and partner with Native American communities. And one of the suggestions that we talked about was Rotary Youth Leadership Academy in Manitowoc Waters. and also the youth exchange program. And a Rotarian friend of mine also suggested that Rotary consider an exchange program between non-Native people and Native Americans right here in our own district. Now, my question specifically is, do you think other tribal representatives would be as receptive as you have been, opening communications and sharing so much about your culture with us, if members of Rotary clubs throughout Wisconsin and Michigan were to reach out to their tribal neighbors and invite them to replicate the kind of program that you saw last night in Wausau and that we're doing here this evening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be beneficial for both the Native and non-Native people locally, because again, there's all these misconceptions about who's doing what, who's in charge, and there's all these things going on constantly. But if we can work together like you're suggesting, I think that would be a really great thing for not only this community, but like multiple communities across wherever you guys have your Rotary experiences.
Well, I think we better leave some time for questions from our group. But before we do that, I just want to thank you for joining us last night, for your time this evening, and mention that Biscayne will be a plenary presenter at our president-elect training session in March. So there'll be another opportunity for clubs to learn more about his culture and the activities in which he is engaging and his efforts at reaching out and collaborating, and the opportunity to work with Rotary. I'm excited about the opportunity, Biscayne, because of your kindness to truly foster peace and conflict resolution and build goodwill and better friendship between our communities. And with that, I will turn this back over to Nancy, who can moderate some questions.
All right, thanks, Roger. We do have one question from Bill, who says, I have a friend from Rotary who has property in the Lac du Flambeau area that's currently restricted and under lots of controversy. Can you speak to the tribe's position and how a compromise could be reached? I don't know what any of that is about, but maybe you do.
Yeah, so there was recently a blockade that was put up by the Lac du Flambeau tribe, and there was some illegal trespassing going through a piece of property to let these people on the lake, these lake owners, lake property owners, onto their property. But that trespassing happened illegally. There was an agreement that was set one time that allowed it between the tribe and the residents, and there was agreement to pay usage of that trespass at one time. And so the bill hasn't been paid for over a few decades. And so that piled up. And finally, our law people and our lawyers, they all looked at that and said, hey, wait a minute. We have an illegal trespass going on. It's been going on for a few decades. And what we want to do is we want to make it right. So what they did is they reached out to the residents and they said, hey, we have this bill, you guys gonna pay it? Because if we went on your property, you definitely wouldn't want us on your property. And so they wanted to do the right thing. And a lot of people just ignored it and said, hey, you're a tribe, figure it out. You have money, blah, blah, blah. They went on and on. And what wound up happening was the tribe says, okay, we're gonna put up a blockade so you can't get to your homes until you pay, you pay your bill. And we all pay our bills, And so that's what happened. There was a miscommunication. And at some point, the title companies had all this information for the people that lived on the lakes. What happened was the title company never sent that information in, and they assumed the tribe would just forget about it.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a miscommunication there. So we have people now that are non-native that are up here. They're blowing this horn saying, that the tribe's evil and tribe's not letting people access to their properties. And we're sitting there like, no, now they know how we feel for the last 500 years, It's exactly what happened to us, And so we're at a pivotal moment right now, and we have a opportunity to make things right, and that's what we're doing. we're asserting what's called sovereignty, and sovereignty was gifted to us from our grandparents, and they got it from the Great Spirit. They got our hunting and fishing and everything. All those rights were given to us by our great grandparents, and so we carry that out today. And we're also asserting our sovereignty on our own little piece of land that we have left over. So if you listen to the word reservation, that's a almost like a concentration camp. The word reservation, and that's how we look at it. If you live on a reservation, it's a group of oppressed people that were put there to fail. That's what it is. That's what a reservation is. It's a current concentration camp in the United States government, in the United States territory. And so our word for reservation in Ojibwe, we say it Ishkoniganing, Ishkoniganing. And you know what that means? That means what's left over.
Mm-hmm.
That's our word for our own land. That's all we have. So we're going to protect it. We're going to put up the blockades, and we're going to have people pay their fines and pay their bills, just like the IRS, just like the state would. They want to make sure that their property and their land is taken care of. Well, we want to do that for our people and our babies too.
All right,
Greg,
thanks.
you might want to mention that both the Bureau of Indian Affairs and federal courts have affirmed your property right and ruled that those easements were not legally granted.
Yeah, exactly. The title company, I believe, I mean, there's all these lawsuits, and there's still a lot of stuff that's pending, but it was in our favor. That whole situation was in the tribe's favor. And again, it goes back to exercising sovereignty. And I think a lot of non-Native people do not really understand what it means to be sovereign. It's actually a totally separate nation in the United States, a sovereign nation, or tribes that are treaty tribes. They're a completely separate nation. Just like we have treaties with Canada and Sweden and all these other countries, the United States government has an obligation to fulfill treaty obligations to our tribe, just as they would any other foreign country. But it's not foreign, it's here.
Okay, question on a different topic. Have members on the reservation experienced any voter suppression efforts?
Voter suppression efforts. I'm not really sure what that question means.
Brian, do you want to unmute?
Thanks, Nancy. Sure. Just curious if, certain parts of the country, certain communities have experienced voter suppression efforts, and it was just curious, has that happened on the reservation?
Yeah, I believe in the past there was some things that have come up, but I'm not too familiar with that. I know that there's are you talking with like tribal elections, or are you just talking about like with the general election?
Any type of election.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think anytime you borrow so the United States Constitution was built after ideals from the Iroquois Confederacy. Okay. And prior to that, our tribe had their own way of dealing with our leadership. Leadership came down it came down through families. And so you were born into a chief lineage, and that's how it was. And these people were groomed and they were brought up to be chiefs that way. And so the current formal government that our tribe models after is the United States government, and how they attain the different types of elections and voting and all that, which doesn't really jive with our traditional beliefs. And so what we have is we have in any kind of situation where there's voting, there's always somebody trying to alter something, and that has happened frequently throughout time. And so again, we have our traditional values, and it worked for thousands of years, and now all of a sudden, because of colonization and adopting this new type of government, which is an electoral system, in order to get a chief, and it wasn't the traditional chief system. You know, there's been a lot of corruption that rides along with that form of government, and there's ways to exploit that, you know, and that I'm pretty sure that's happened here before. So yeah,
Nancy, let me comment on that, because more than 10,000 Wisconsin Native Americans have moved and live in the city of Milwaukee. And some people argue that there are Native voter suppression efforts today in Milwaukee by the consolidation of polling places, limiting the number of polling places in minority districts and making it more difficult and creating longer lines in the city of Milwaukee today.
All right, I want to be respectful of time. Biscaconi, can you stay on for a few more minutes? We have a few more questions.
sure, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, okay. All right. Judy asks if you can talk a little bit about the ancestral religion of your tribe.
Well, there's several different religions that our people practice, and we don't really like to call them religions, but we call them, it's just a way of life, a way of heart. And so we have a lot of it we won't even talk about publicly, so I apologize for that. We have a lot of our ceremonies are kept quiet, and there's a reason for that, okay? Because one time when our grandparents were shipped off to boarding school, when they would talk about it, they were beat, and they were isolated in these little units, and we couldn't talk about our religions, and they didn't want us to talk about it. And so that's a fresh memory still. And so a lot of our religions we won't talk about, but the ones that we do talk about are kind of on the surface, you know. We have societies that are always happening behind the scenes here on the reservation, always constantly. Even tonight, right when I'm done here, we're heading somewhere. We're going to be taking care of some ceremonial responsibilities, and there's some health issues that we got to deal with locally with some of our people. And so I guess culture and religion for the Ojibwe people is thriving, and it's at a really good place right now. It wasn't so good back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, but now it's doing really good. And it's because of the efforts of a few elderly people that held on to culture in the past, and they kept it quiet and they kept it in their hearts. And when there was people ready to share and ready to know, they said, okay, there's a whole generation of people that want to know who they are, where they come from, and how our ancestors did it. So they began to give that to us, and they gave that to a few of us here, and we helped it to grow into what it is today. And I just want to say that it's doing really well. Today, Native people don't need to be saved like they did, our people assume they did a long time ago. It's not that way anymore. We don't need anybody to ride in on a horse and save us. We don't need that. We have our own ways, and it's very strong right now. So,
All right.
I guess, yeah, that's all we really need to talk about.
Okay. Another question, would you address the current cultural movement where Native stories are getting a lot more attention? Killers of the Flower Moon, Reservation Dogs, several books. How do you see this kind of cultural spotlight, positives and possible negatives?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. One of my friends is one of the writers for the Reservation Dogs, and he's a really good friend of mine. And it was interesting because he started out in comedy, and he would just make these online videos, and they're called the 1491. So if you guys ever want to watch them, you can watch them. Google 1491s, and it's a comedy trio, and there's these friends, and they all do these silly skits. But it started there, and what they did was they got the ball rolling and saying, hey, we can joke about this stuff. It doesn't always have to be so serious, you know. And so from there it went into storytelling, and people realizing that there was values that the rest of the world could benefit from in our storytelling. And we have these two types of storytelling. We have like almost like fables, and we have things that are called Atazokan, which are sacred stories that can only be told when there's snow on the ground. And there's a reason for that. And it's not only on TV, and it's not only in the media and these books and publishing, But there's events, and there's one I got to go talk at on January 19th in Duluth, Minnesota. I got invited to go up there and share traditional stories because I'm one of our traditional storytellers here on the reservation. And people are really grasping for that knowledge. And a lot of that came from when COVID happened. There was a lot of idle people. What are we going to do? We're going stir crazy, you know? And so what we did is we reintroduced our culture, not only to our people, but to the surrounding world through social media. And what happened was a cultural revolution happened. And people want to know these things now. They want to know who we are, our stories, where we come from, and how that can benefit our lives, because we just went through something that our great grandparents went through. There was a time when in their life where they ran out of food, and you know, there was all this depression. We just came out of that ourselves, you know. And so the people that knew those stories, they were actually almost like doctors and therapists, you know. And so that happened here, and we got to and then it caught on, and people, they saw the value in that for their communities, and so they take it and they use that now, and they realize that laughter is the best medicine, and they realize that storytelling is really good medicine, and not everything is done with our cell phones, and our health is at stake, and our sanity is at stake, and that's something that happened with this current COVID situation. So I believe that. Good
Thank
question.
you. So there's a couple of additional comments in the chat, so I'll allow people to go in and read those themselves. And we didn't have a chance to introduce Julia Wallace. Julia is our district governor, and she just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. Julia.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I so much appreciate your willingness to talk with us. Roger, I think you've done a wonderful job of interacting with our group. Sorry, my video is still there. I want to acknowledge that Norbert Hill's here, so he also should be part of this conversation as well. You mentioned that everything is about communication, and we just do not have enough communication. So I'm hoping this will open up a full year during Roger's DG year, and beyond that, of far more open communication between our Native population and our Rotary individuals and everybody else in the state of Wisconsin. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Roger, anything further from you?
The only thing that I would suggest is that I would encourage clubs to think about their Native neighbors, and I would be more than happy to share my thoughts on how to extend the invitation. Perhaps Piscataqua could also share thoughts on how to invite our Native neighbors. And I would be more than happy to share appropriate questions that might make a format like this a good local Rotary Club program. Piscataqua, could you just comment briefly on how you would advise us to reach out to Native Americans in the communities where we have Rotary clubs?
Right. So what I would do is I would approach, what you do is you want to go to the local tribes, wherever your tribes are at, and go to their enrollment department or their wherever their secretaries might be, and ask for to look at their schedule of council meetings. And what you want to do is you want to get into those council meetings, and you want to express to the leadership, because every tribe has a tribal council. You want to express to the leadership your intentions, and just be real about it. Let them know that you've been in contact with several Native American people, storytellers, and so forth. And they suggest that you reach out to them, their leadership, and that's a good way to do it. You go to those council rooms, you go to those council members in the council chambers, and you talk to the leadership about your intentions, what you want to do. A lot of the stuff that we had mentioned previously with the students, and I know yesterday you talked about the different grant opportunities. Make your intentions known, because that's one thing us natives like, is we like the truth. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. One last question for you. Can you tell us what Biscockenny means? Is there a meaning to your name?
Yeah. So when I was young, I got this Ojibwe name for an elderly woman in our community. It actually means when you look at a fire burning and you see those little embers flying off the fire, that's what that means, those sparks of fire. And I was told that when I was young, that was my name. And I'll understand this when I get older, but those embers will fly off and they'll land somewhere else, and they'll start another culture fire over here and over here. And that has been true my whole life. I've been reigniting a lot of cultural fires, not only here but in surrounding areas and surrounding communities. So, but it's not only me. There's a lot of younger folks that are making that possible, that are reaching out, and a lot of our elders are leaving, and in many instances they're gone, and so we have big shoes to fill. So we have to live our lives a certain way, and I believe that in a certain way that I was groomed for this through my name and through certain teachers in my life to do this type of work for our people in our communities. So that's where
Well,
that name comes from.
We appreciate, that's beautiful. We appreciate you being here. So thank you so much. I just have a couple of really quick announcements, folks. Next first Thursday in February, we're hoping to have Mike Castor come and talk about RYLA, Rotary Youth Leadership. So that's on the agenda. And then in March, we're hoping to continue our Cultural Appreciation Initiative. So stay tuned. April, we're hoping to look at environmental projects that our clubs have been involved in to recognize Earth Day. And then in May, we're hoping to again return to our Cultural Appreciation Initiative. So please stay tuned. TriCon, our conference in Green Bay, registration is open, early bird rates until February 15th. So please sign up. It's going to be a great event. Those of you who are president-elect or president nominees, our PETS conference is the first weekend in March. Again, going to be a great event. And I think I'm going to wrap up with that. So
February 3rd, PPETS.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yes, February 3rd is our district assembly, our One Summit event from 9 until 11 a.m. We are going to be really examining the synergy between the good work that clubs do, the public image that we try to share as we do good work, and our work to grow our clubs and how that's all intertwined. So that's going to be February 3rd via Zoom. So please sign up. Lisa, I believe, has sent the links out already. And then that same day, following the Rotary One Summit, we will have grants training for District 6220 at 11:15. And then for president-elects, we have a president-elect prep session. So president-elects know what to expect when they go to PETS training in March. And that will start at 12:30. So lots going on. It's the busy season for Rotarians. Thank you all. Thanks, Roger, for hosting and helping to set this up. And thank you again to Biscani for being here. I think he maybe already signed off because he had other things to do this evening. But thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Biscockenay. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Good night.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.